And I have Sharmila Tagore here and Nandita Das on my right. And I know that it is a bit of a cliche to say that people don't need introduction, but these people actually don't. And, but nevertheless, I will just give you a very quick run through. Sharmila Tagore made her debut in 1959 in Satyajit Ray's Opur Sangshar, or The World of Opu. And after that, she acted in a film called Devi, the Goddess, again Satyajit Ray. And after that, after acting in quite a few Bengali films actually, she moved in 1964 to act in Kashmir Ki Kali in Bombay. And there began her career as an actress in Bombay. And I'm sure that all of you who have gathered here have seen her films and are very familiar with her trajectory. The thing that I'd like to point out to some of you, and you may not know that, is that throughout her career in Bombay, she continued to act in Bengali films, not just in Satyajit Ray's films, but in other films as well. Some very major films, and many of them are blockbusters. In fact, somebody today came and said that he was a fan of your films, and one of the films he mentioned was Amanush, which was a film that was made in Bengali and in Hindi, Shakti Samant. And through her career, she's worked with a number of very important directors other than Satyajit Ray. And of course, Sharmila Tagore is very much a part of the Ray legacy. But directors like Rishikesh Mukherjee, Asit Sen, Shakti Samant, Manmohan Desai, Ramesh Sharma, Rituparna Ghosh, Gautam Ghosh, a whole range of people. And Gulzar, of course. And yes, I shouldn't use this? Okay. And I have a note that says I should keep looking at the monitor, which is the time monitor. So I'm alerting my co-panelists to that, those changing numbers blinking at you. Yes. There's just one thing I want to say before I get into the conversation, because we don't have very much of time, and that is between 1963 and 1989, Sharmila Tagore acted in more than 100 films. And she had a release every year. And the average release was 4 films in a year. So that's a huge number. That's a very admirable kind of arithmetic. And I have Nandita Das over here, who, as all of you know, made a very sensational debut with Fire. You saw a little clip of that over here. And she isn't really a Bollywood heroine in that sense, because she has acted in over 40 films, and it may seem like strange to all of you because you may not have heard of many of them, but that's because she's one of the few actresses who's acted in a range of different regional films and in different languages. Nandita herself is a polyglot, can speak several languages, and probably that's why she has found it easy to work in many of those films. But I must tell you, and this might come as a bit of a surprise to some of you, and that is, she's a bit of a reluctant actress. And while her foremost professional identity is that of an actress, that's not the identity she considers to be most important. So Nandita Das is an actress, but she's also a writer, she's a potter, she's a columnist, and I think now she is very seriously a filmmaker. So I'd like to start this conversation with Sharmila Tagore. And when you acted in Satyajit Ray's film in 1959, you were very young. You couldn't have made a very conscious choice about acting in film. So how did that work out? How did that happen?
I was growing up in a joint family. I was staying with my grandparents in Kolkata. And I was 13 years old at that time. And at that time, we were not really allowed to see films. Not that my parents were not very conservative, but my grandparents and that, my uncles and aunts, and we lived in a very, very big place. The thought was that films were not really good for young people. So I had no idea about films, and we didn't even we were talking about Googles just now, and social media, and TV, we didn't had any of it. There was only radio. And at that time, Satyajit Ray appeared on the screen, and he made films respectable. if you know, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So one day the phone rang, and it was Satyajit Ray. He'd already made Pathir Panchali and a couple of other films. Even Aparajito has been made, and he was getting international acclaim all over the place. And he wanted me as the child bride of Opu in Opur Sangshar, the world of Opu. And of course, I don't think I knew anything about it. This was a conversation between my grandmother and him, and then finally my father, because my father was in Asansol at that time. And he thankfully said yes. And that's what happened. And he said that don't allow her to make an ass of herself. If she's good, then take her, otherwise not. So there was a screen test, but it was a silent screen test. I had to just look here and look there, and that was that. And it changed my life completely.
Right. I mean, you know, in several interviews you've talked about crossing the threshold of the first sequence in
That's
Opur
right.
Sangshar, and I was wondering whether you would like to share that with this audience.
I know the first day's shooting was when Opu, I don't know how many of you have seen, and there is not enough time to give you even the gist of the story, but I'm hoping that some of you have seen Opur Sangshar. This is where Opu marries. He goes for a wedding, but ends up marrying the bride. And then he brings her home to his one-room tenement. And the shot is that there is a closed door, and Soumitra and I, that was his first film also, standing outside the closed door. And Manikda, as we called Ray, and Shubrata Mitra, who was the duke. The unit is on the other side of the closed door. And his voice rang out, start sound, camera, action. And Soumitra asked me, are you feeling nervous? So I said, no, why should I feel nervous? You know, when you're young, you're used to taking orders from people. The nervousness comes much later. Anyway, so Soumitra opened the door and looked at me and said, Isho, come. So I crossed the threshold and I walk in, and Manikda says, 2 steps forward, look right, look left, raise your shoulders, heave a kind of a sigh, look up, cut, excellent, next shot. So that was my first shot. And I was wondering whether he had kept that on purpose, because Aparna and I were feeling absolutely the same thing. We had no idea what was behind that closed door. So now, of course, he's not there anymore, and I was 13 and he was 33, so he was very old for me. And I wish I had that kind of conversation then, to find out why did he keep that shot on that particular day.
But nevertheless, that crossing of the threshold was important because you then went on to become an actress.
He changed my life.
That's right. But in your case, Nandita, how does it feel to be called an actress or be known as an actress when you aren't? That isn't really your passion, it is your identity.
I guess it's just simple that it's a public space and people know you through that public space. And we also like sort of putting people in boxes. We all do that. None of us really have the time to go deep into anybody's, what do they really do? What are their passions? So when you put a label, you're like, okay, I know she's an actress. You don't really, I mean, I don't spend, if you say your profession is something that you spend at least 50% of your time. And I don't spend even 50% of my time acting. I've been very much on the fringes of it. This is the city I grew up in, lived here for the longest time, and went to Bombay for matters of the heart and definitely not work. But I think it has been an interesting journey for me in many ways because I came from a social work background. And initially, after becoming an actor, in the sense after Fire, suddenly people started calling me to these kind of forums and to talk about issues that I cared for. And initially I thought, wow, that's strange. I used to do much more work then and nobody called me. And now I've suddenly become an actor and suddenly people want me to talk about all these issues. And I knew there were others who were much more qualified for it. So I went through a phase of sort of being angry with the superficialness of this whole thing. And then made peace with it because I felt, okay, I'm getting this opportunity to talk about things I care for. And for me, then films became more a means to an end instead of an end in itself. And I tried to sort of balance, keep that little space. And I also started enjoying the experience of being in different units, telling different stories, but not enough as an actor. Like even if I see a script, I would always be more attracted to the story or conversations with the director as opposed to seeing, okay, what my role is. So in some ways, even those 40 films have been more an interest, a means, as opposed to kind of saying that, yes, this is what I'm ambitious, this is my goal, and let me find a path for it.
Right. Well, we are in a session which I just realized is called Taming of the Heroine, and I couldn't be sitting with two most unlikely to the title women. These are totally very untamed women. And so I want to come back to some of what you were raising, you just raised in what you said. But just to go back to your experience of now moving to Bombay, a very different kind of a place, and I'm talking about her making her debut with Kashmir Ki Kali. What kind of an environment was that for actresses and for the heroine? Or an actress who was actually playing the heroine?
Well, it was very different time, obviously. But even when after I worked in Opushanshar, I don't know how many people know it, but I had to leave my school. Although my family agreed, but the school felt that I would be a very bad influence on other children, although I was in that school and I was doing well. And leave I had to. And so I think there was a huge prejudice against actually working women also. Although women had started working at that time, but there were, as you've seen in Meghna Katara and Mrinal Sen and Ritik Ghatak has made many films like that. Although they were working, but they were not really, their money was appreciated. But they were constantly, they had to prove themselves that they were not, it was not considered respectable. So that was the society's attitude. And when I went to Bombay, I became a social suspect because I came from Calcutta and everybody knew G.N. Tagore. I was G.N. Tagore's daughter. But in Bombay, I was living alone in Taj Mahal Hotel, which in itself was hugely suspicious. And I was not chaperoned, which was again not heard of, because all the heroines were chaperoned, and most of them, I think all of them, wore white. They sat very decorously, they didn't smile, they didn't talk, and they looked at their mother for approval, whether they should engage in conversation or not. So it was a very, very different scene. I mean, they were in public what they were not in private, whereas I was the same. And my friend was Tanuja, because she was also a bit like me, wild as people thought, but I was exactly then what I was and what I am now. But she was accepted because she was Shobna Samat's daughter, she was Tanuja's sister, she was Maharashtrian, so she was known. I was an unknown quantity. And they wanted to put me in a slot, but they couldn't, because I also read a couple of books and I would talk in a different fashion. So they couldn't quite figure out. So I became La Tagore for some reason.
Because there wasn't really a new box had to be created for you.
Yeah.
But this way that, you said that you were a bit of a social suspect, and then people kind of trying to figure out, who's this woman who seems to be a bit of an intellectual and yet kind of a bit wild. How did that play out in social situations?
Well, I remember shooting in Kashmir Ki Kali, for instance. We spent about a month, and there was a group photograph that was taken. And there were some of our friends who had come, or rather Shamiji's friend, who had come up from Kolkata or from Bombay or wherever. And so there was some social, civil society people there with us. And the photograph found its way in the front page of Filmfare. And it was a Birla family girl. They bought up the entire publication, because how could their daughter be seen with a film unit? So can you imagine from where to where we have come today? Now, so you can see the change. And also I remember talking about the inside, because at that time, it was the heroine, the director, and the producer. Even the DOP, as they're called now, we used to call them cameramen, and they wouldn't come into the periphery of your vision. So there was a rap party after Kashmir Ki Kali, and I loved dancing, and there was dancing and music, and everybody was dancing, and I was sitting like this, and Robert Dance Master, there was a dance master, I don't know, I'm sure they also have very sophisticated names now. Yeah, choreographer, yes. So Robert came and asked me for a dance, and I danced. And I was enjoying myself. And after about 15 minutes, Shakti ji came and sort of, I want to have a word. So took me aside and dressed me down. He said, what are you doing? Heroines don't dance. I said, but I dance on the screen. No, but you can't. You have to behave yourself. This is absolutely not acceptable. So this kind of it was very perplexing,
Yeah.
but I didn't get into that. I just did what I had to do.
You danced along. I mean,
I
whenever
danced.
you felt like, and that's how you've been, and that's absolutely wonderful. But Nandita, did you have anything? I mean, times had changed. When you started acting in films, but you acted in Fire. There's never been another Fire again. I mean,
Sadly.
yes. So it is, a film that, was attacked, and the screenings were stopped. But what has been your experience about that film? I mean, is it still an important film for you?
Oh, I think it'll always be. For me and for the world
For-
we live in, I think,
Yes.
I mean, even the fact that Delhi High Court repealed 377, I want to believe that somewhere a little bit of a seed was also sown through Fire. It triggered a lot of conversation in the public domain. We were so used to not talking about it, hushing about it, shoving it under the carpet. So it definitely did. But when I did the film, like often people say that was a really bold first film. But I had no clue there was going to be a second film.
right.
So for me, it wasn't about it being a bold first film. It just seemed like a story that needed to be told, especially coming from a very liberal family. That was one subject that we never really talked about at home. But I didn't think I would actually sort of become a LGBT activist by default, because you do a film and then you're asked various questions, and it's through those questions and reactions that you also grow. I mean, intellectually I had understood it, but I really didn't know emotionally or didn't have a deeper understanding of it. But then somebody on a flight sitting next to you would say, that do you realize what an irresponsible thing you did? Like you can make so many people lesbians. And you would say, really? I mean, this is the level of conversation one will have to engage with. So I think just these varied kind of reactions that this film got, or you're getting your hair cut and the girl says that, मैं भी उस type की हूँ, madam, जैसे आप थी ना वो fire में, not finding even a word to express it. So it was really that whole range of reactions, I think, that helped me personally grow, and the conversation that I was seeing around myself. I mean, it's been 20 years. Literally, this year is the 20th anniversary of Fire. So it's definitely a very, very important film for us as a society and for me personally.
And I think it's been a very, very important film for the LGBT community, because it actually sparked off the first national debate on homosexuality. So I think that contribution is, always going to be there.
And also, I think, on freedom of expression.
Freedom
It
of
got-
expression, yes.
The
Yeah.
fact that because it was attacked, there were people who hadn't seen the film, didn't know, but just came onto the streets to question it. Why should we be monitored or told what we should watch or not watch? So suddenly it, I think, opened up a lot of conversations which had repercussions going forward. And till today, we are sort of struggling with many of them.
Struggling with many of those issues. But the kind of sexism that, Sharmila was talking about, were you confronted with any of that?
I mean,
Or
I
in a
think
more
as-
subtle way, perhaps?
I think as we progress, so to say, the sexism, the prejudice becomes more and more subtle. It's not so overt. And therefore, I think sometimes it's more difficult to counter it or negotiate through it. Because they are so subtle, you also are finding subtle ways to, deal with it. For me, the biggest thing was that I hadn't really grown up watching commercial cinema, so I was looked upon as this person who thinks too much of herself. She's done her masters, because not too many actors had. So there would be articles on who are the actresses who have studied beyond their graduation. Sharmila Di, no comment on that. I mean, I don't mean it.
But she's at university by herself.
Exactly. No, but these kind of things, because people had their own perceptions about it. The bigger thing for me was that, oh, here is a dark girl who has remained dark for 20 years. Like, every article of mine would start with dark and dusky Nandita Das. They had to almost kind of qualify or apologize. She's an actress despite being dark. So I think there was a lot of that. And when I would do rural characters or a slum dweller, it was very good, it was an advantage. But if I had to do an upper middle class, educated character, then somebody from the unit would come and tell me that I know you don't like lightening your skin, but for this character, because she's educated and she's upper middle class, if you could lighten your skin. So, we had those struggles as well.
Right. And of course, you've been part of that Dark is Beautiful campaign. But I was also, wondering whether you could share some of you've had your share of sexism actually. Nandita acted in a very important film that she thought was very mainstream for her, but the director thought it was a bit of an alternative film. But it is a very big star, and she...
You can name it.
And she went into the, sets to find that it was a kind of a boys' club, and she was a bit of a disadvantage because she wasn't a great fan of the hero. And so,
well, now I can't name it.
Yes, now you can't. I was hoping you wouldn't name it. Yeah.
No, the whole industry in that way, and I think much more when Sharmila Di was there, and you've actually seen the change happen. But even in sort of last few years, it's definitely much more a male-dominated place, and it's very, like I said, it's very subtle. So if a male actor is giving a suggestion, it's taken much more seriously as opposed to a woman actor. And there's no way to actually pinpoint and say there is a difference. How do you really catch people doing that? But it is there. You can feel it very strongly. So.
But one of the interesting things that Nandita has always done is that whenever she's had a character to play, she would also re-script that character in some ways. So the film that we have been actually talking about is Aks. And if you could just talk a little bit about how you changed that character.
Well, I started becoming part of the writing group because I didn't really see any reason why I should have been even chosen for that. So my initial reaction was, no, I don't think I fit in the character. Not that in life older men don't marry younger women, and I would be the last person to judge it. But in cinema, and especially in Hindi cinema, you almost have to justify it. What is the reason? So I became part of the scripting process, and something like marital rape that we are still struggling and talking about legally and socially was something that I tried to put in that character, where her husband who's possessed with an evil act and actually almost tries to rape me, and I tell him the next morning that you raped me, and initially the director and everyone says, you can't say that, he's your husband, how can he rape you? And I said, but that's what he did, that's what we just showed, you showed him being violent to me, so why can't we use the word? And we kept it. So there were small things like that, or she disagrees with him on something and she says, I love you, but that doesn't mean I have to agree with everything that you do or say. So these kind of things one tried to, but at the end of the day, a film is much larger than I think the actors. Actors are perceived to be larger, but we are such a small part in many ways, especially when you're working with people who are not really collaborative in that sense. I'm not talking about this film, but in general.
In general, okay. I was just wondering whether you want to go back a little bit to those wonderful days in the 60s and all these films that we love to see, and what was happening behind it.
I just want to say what
Respond to her.
Nandita was talking about, exactly like that, when we were working, even then, the kind of, they were wonderful directors, but they came from a different background and they were very conservative, and even the dialogues were different. And the heroes, who of course came so late, except for Shashi Kapoor, the girls would be ready on time, and then this wait would begin. all that has changed. Now nobody can afford
I've experienced a lot of that as well.
Yeah, you have experienced that, yeah.
Yeah, but now a film cannot afford a hero, even no matter how good if they, yeah. So all that used to happen, and it was a boys' club because they would sit in the music rehearsal, the actual recording of the thing, and there was much backslapping, and at parties they would talk about their films. So that, and the women didn't really enter that
out of the loop,
that space. So that was very much there, and not at your time. At my time, we were not even given a script. There was no script
because it was being written.
It was and the dialogues were written, and for a Bengali, it was very difficult for me to. And then there was very verbose, very theatrical kind of language, which again is become better because Urdu has given place to English now. So you don't say diwana, you say, are you mad? That kind of thing. So, so there was always, and the dressing table, you would find things like eau de cologne, talcum powder, and hair oil. So that was the standard, and it was very difficult. And I would discuss and argue all the time. And Shashi Kapoor would look at his watch and said, "Come on, you Bengali. I mean, can you please stop arguing? Can we get on with it?" So, on the set, it's very difficult to do that. And as you say, then, one just got on with it and tried to do as much as one can do to that role and not do something that was terribly.
Yeah,
But what you were asking me about the environment, personally, I didn't really experience any kind of sexism as such. I mean, everybody was nice to me and I did my own thing. But I remember when I started going out with Tiger, and even then in Bombay it was all right, although things were being written in the media, quite shocking things. And but when we went for evening in Paris outdoor, right? So first we went to Interlaken, then we went to Paris, then we went to Niagara, and then we came to Beirut. So this was the itinerary. And when we were shooting in Paris, Tiger was playing for Sussex, and he had broken his finger, so he couldn't play. So he thought he would give me a surprise and came to Paris. Little did he know what he was doing. So I moved out from where the unit was. The unit stayed in some place, and Shamiji and Shakti were in George Sank, where I was. And so I moved out to another place, a bed and breakfast place with Tiger, and then all hell broke loose. So that was the entire unit took a very moral stand that our girl is going out with somebody who's not a member of the unit. So I was actually ostracized. Nobody talked to me. Nobody, even during rehearsal, I wasn't told what was happening. So I don't know how I worked in that film. So anyway, Paris wasn't too bad because Tiger was there. Then we went off to Niagara Falls, and the unit was pared down to most people. The hairdresser didn't come, who was an ally, a woman and a friend. And there was another woman character, so they didn't come. So it was only I. And I was alone in this hotel, and I used to work and come back. And there was this Italian waiter who would come and say, "Why you're always here? Can I take you out for dinner somewhere? Can we do something?" And he was so sweet. But these guys were really, nobody spoke. And then I rang up a friend of Tiger's called David Dunlop, who was in Toronto. So I said, "Come and have dinner." This was the last day. So he came to have dinner with me. And when he came, I said, "I'm going back to Toronto with you. You have to take me to Toronto." So we, for the first time, went up to the roof, the terrace, to have dinner. And the unit was there. Some of the people were there. So while going out, I had to cross them, and I introduced David to everybody. They were so rude to him. Anyway, so we left. And on the way back, there was much, because David says, "I don't think I have enough gas in all the gas stations." So the next day, he checked me into a hotel. I took the plane, and I went off to Paris. And from the Paris, I went to London and didn't tell anybody. I had my passport, I had my ticket. And those days, there was no cell phone. They didn't know where I had gone. Anyway, I knew my dates. In London, I met Tiger's mother. We told her we are planning to get married, and she made her conditions. We had a lovely time. So on the due date, I went to Beirut.
Arrived on set.
And oh my God, they were so rejoiced and whatever. And all that happened. And then I used to talk to Tiger through the operator. The operator would say, "Ma'am, can I come and see you? You sound very unhappy. Can I do something for you?" So they were all invited to a wedding. So that was the unit, including the dance master. This time it was Raj.
But you have to say what happened when you got engaged.
So then I came back to India, and I remember we were shooting for that Susie character. This was the time of the double role, because what the vamps couldn't do now they wanted the heroines to do the transgressive role.
So if you don't know what she's talking about, you must watch An Evening in Paris. It's a lovely film.
Yeah. So anyway, I was doing this cabaret thing, but I had got engaged and had a ring in my finger.
So everything was okay.
And every member of that team, who was giving me such a hard time were completely different.
Yeah.
Because I had
You had
arrived.
acquired respectability
Yes,
now.
I was now part of the collective.
So, we have this big screen staring at us saying that we have 5 minutes and 6 seconds. And I had a question for the two of you. And that is, I have two questions for her and one for you, connected. One is, what is the, you are very much an industry insider even now and a detached observer. Number one, what is the major change that you see now in relation to actresses and heroines? And what is the major change you would like to see?
Well,
The latter question is for you. What would you like to see?
if, a lot of things have changed now, like the money is in place, the films are made much faster. In my time, it used to take 2-3 years to be made. So maintaining continuity was very difficult. And like I said, the heroes used to come time. So all that has become much more regular. And there is a lot of, it's more democratic, everybody is treated equally. All that is very good. And I think even the women character, 80s were the pits, if you remember. There was so much violence perpetrated on women. Angry Young Man of Amitabh Bachchan, where there was a lot of violence. And of course, very interesting things were happening with Sham Benegal and, Bhumika and Ankur, and there was wonderful female protagonists, and the middle of the road with Rishikesh Mukherjee and Gulzar and, Mausam and Adhi, and so all those things were being made. 70s was very interesting, but then because of lack of distribution, lack of finance, that petered out. And 80s, when the TV arrived, and in competition, there was so much rape, it was awful. 80s was really, really bad for women, except for Arth, Mahesh Bhatt's Arth. I don't think any decent film came out, and maybe very few and far between. And then 90s, with that opening up, and then the push of, this global whatever. And so all these Dulhaniya Le Jayegi and Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham. So there was, although more and more women were going out to work, there was no presence of women working women in Indian cinema. And it was all became very happy, joint family, and vengefully traditional. The more India was opening up, the more modern we were becoming. There was this regressive thinking, and they were all waiting to be married, and marriage being the passport.
There were exceptions.
Obviously, there's exceptions everywhere. And then came the 90s, and then now. So now with all these wonderful young directors, with Dibakar Banerjee, Sujit Sarkar, Sujay Ghosh, Vishal Bhardwaj, they brought a different kind of energy. And now there's so much, and the audience has changed meanwhile, because the audience is seeing better films. Multiplexes have arrived,
yes,
ensuring that films get a release, whether it's a small film or a big film. So as a result, and the filmmaking can be very expensive, but also very reasonable, like Piku and Pink has been made with a very reasonable budget. So all these churning has happened.
But what's the change you would like to see? And we have 1
oh my God.
minute, 46 seconds.
Well, like see, Piku is a woman looking after the father. That could not have happened earlier. We were always crying and wringing our hands and looking helpless. So now this kind of concept that a woman can do that was not there. And what I would like to change, everybody knows I don't want to, 7 minutes? Something.
This is very confusing.
So we don't want to
this
go
is
into
doing
that.
An arithmetic
but
we
what
don't
I would
understand.
like changed is, because the wonderful things are happening, and today's, I'm feeling very envious of today's, and even the age stereotype is better, like Ratna Shah did that wonderful role in Kapoor and Sons. All that is positive. But like going back to, say, Three Idiots, for instance, which was a blockbuster hit, right? But there was this girl who was a wonderful expert gynecologist who delivers a baby through this TV thing or whatever the technical
remote communication.
she's so that good and successful, but she doesn't know her mind. She doesn't know who she is in love with. It requires Mr. Amir Khan to tell her that, hello, this is the sort of person he is, you know, not once, twice. So a woman doesn't know her mind. She has to be guided by a male, and she has to be protected. Alone she will struggle. So in Cocktail, Deepika, who's wonderful, but she wants to cook tandoori chicken, and she wants to be a homemaker. So these subtle messages keep coming all the time. Like Pink, everybody is raving about it. All those lovely, relevant feminist arguments have been incorporated in the movie, and it's very good, doing very well. But again, the people who are articulating those arguments are men. And agreed that if there was no Amitabh Bachchan, maybe people wouldn't have seen the film. And he has made the elderly visible and even sexy. But why can't those roles be written for elderly women? You know, there are no dearth of women. So
People appreciate that.
yeah, so it is a boys' club, and people should start doing that. Like The Accused of Jodie Foster, that was a different film.
Yes.
So that is where I want to go. And of course, coming back, the pay scale also has to be equal somewhere. There has to be some relevance.
So you have to put your money where your mouth is. So Nandita, what aspirations or desires do you have for this industry?
No, I think everything that Sharmila Di said, and that will probably happen when there are more women behind the camera as well. There is, I mean, why can't there be a woman composer? I mean, there are, but again, few and far between. Editors, filmmakers, story writers. It is increasing, so one doesn't want to sound like a cynic, but there's still so few. So when the stories, when you say that, you know, all the important dialogues are being said by men, because also there are a lot of men who are writing, and you can only think like yourself in a way.
I would just like to say that it's not necessarily that all women would.
No, absolutely. No,
I mean,
no,
we
not at
have
all.
many women who are making
Yeah.
typically commercial and
Sure.
that men's point of view across.
But
or
it's
the
just a
male gaze.
different gaze. Like I remember when I did Firak, you know, suddenly one was called to these panels of women directors. When you direct, you're not constantly thinking you are a woman. You're just directing. And you're still not part of the larger director's pool. But having said that, the fact that you are a woman, because that's all you know how to do, as in you are, so therefore your gaze is probably going to be different. And yet I was asked questions like, why did you do Firak? You're so involved with issues of women. Why didn't you do a women-centric film? But women also think about other things of life. Women are also impacted by everything that happens around them, especially violence and conflicts and all of that. So I think even as women directors or thinking women or whatever labels they are, you're expected to do a certain kind of thing.
There's a thing called, have you heard of Bechdel test?
Yeah, the Bechdel test.
So Bechdel test is the yardstick for how
We passed it.
women-friendly film is. And for those who don't know, it must have two women in the film, and both the women must
should be
speak
talking
with
to each
to
other,
talking to
but
each
not
other,
about
a scene,
their boyfriend.
and not about men.
A man.
Not about men. So if you pass those tests, then
That's right.
I don't know.
Alison
But even
Bechdel.
in Ramlila, that didn't happen. They were talking about men.
I
right?
have to see it again to see what they were talking
Ramlila,
about.
I mean Bajirao Mastan.
What is
That
it?
was a tough little one.
And I think in the last 6-7 years, more such films have come out which have pushed the envelope. And in those last 6 years, I also became a mother and was the chairperson of the Children's Film Society. I did a play, so I also kind of moved away. And the reason I also went into regional films in some ways was also because it was frustrating to be in this big pond and trying to do the kind of films you wanted to do, because they still had to compete with the big sharks. And so the compromises were much more. Whereas I think what we call regional films, because they're as Indian and as, you know, as the Hindi films, but I felt there was more honesty, people made less compromises, and in some ways, some of my better experiences have been there.
And in Assamese and Bengali films, again, I won't generalize, but some of the Bengali films gave, like the reason why I did Bengali films continuously, as you said, because of the roles. That really, they were increased my self-worth, yes.
Absolutely.
I think that's been very exciting, and
You still
we
have
can
some.
take 3 questions from the audience. And so if anybody would like to ask a question, if you can just, yeah, a short question, because you know this is still ticking away. And if you raise your hand, I hope to be able to see it. Yes, please go ahead. I think you might need, is somebody going to give him a mic?
No, there is a lady now.
Yeah. Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
So somebody will have to help me spot the people because I can't actually see at the
She's
back.
there, she's
Yes.
speaking.
Yeah, I'm Neha, and I had a small question. So, in this pursuit of projecting women to be strong and women who can really stand it to men, isn't there a loss of femininity that is happening? So, if I look at the popular culture, advertising or films, there is this whole, need and a desperate need for women to really come across as
Yeah.
strong characters.
Yeah.
Do you want to take it? Should I take it?
Why don't you answer?
Well, I kind of, since I so lack femininity, I should not actually be trying to answer that question. So I should pass it on to the more feminine, my more feminine co-panelists.
No, I don't agree with that. Would you say that we are becoming less feminine if we address a issue that needs to be addressed, which involves gender, or if you are asking what is due to us? I mean, this is a very like people say women talk too much, because I think they are, again, seeing it in the context of people expect them to be quiet. So there is a very, they want women to behave in a particular way. They want people to wear clothes. So, which is sort of traditional clothes. Yes, everybody must wear. but you know, so
What is also
they
femininity?
judge.
And how do you define femininity?
Exactly, how do you define
We are in times
femininity?
of gender bender, so how do you even define?
And things are changing. What was very feminine would be considered very naka now, surely.
And the fact we are saying being strong is not feminine, that itself is, I think, slightly problematic. And to create more layers in women characters.